Hello, my name is Morgan, and I am writing a PhD dissertation right now. This is a massive amount of research and writing, and I have needed to find a way to manage all of that knowledge so that I can use it in my dissertation writing. And the way that I've done that is using a system called the Zettelkasten, and I have a whole introductory video about that system, so if you're interested in how to note-take efficiently for a large knowledge project, then you can go check out that video. In brief though, a Zettelkasten is a tool for note-taking, thinking, and managing your knowledge. And importantly for this video, all of your knowledge in the Zettelkasten system should be broken down into irreducible thoughts. And each of those thoughts is going to get its own note card in this system. And each of those note cards need a unique identifier so that you can always find them. Those identifiers are also how the notes are going to reference each other, because the Zettelkasten, what's great about it is it's this big interconnected web of knowledge, so you can actually see how all of your ideas are connecting to each other. So this video is about the very important task of what to name each of these thoughts or notes. I'm going to mention physical Zettelkasten note-taking briefly. Note that I don't use a physical Zettelkasten. I don't use literal pieces of paper to store my knowledge. I use a digital system, so my understanding of the physical system is limited, but I'm going to do my best to explain how I would do it for you, and I will actually have a video coming up about how to start a physical Zettelkasten, which I'm actually going to attempt to do. But then the rest of this video is going to be about how you should name your notes in a digital Zettelkasten, and in particular in an Obsidian Zettelkasten, because that is what I use. There is no right way to title your notes. Whatever system works best for you is the one that you should ultimately use. However, there are some wrong ways to title your notes. So I'm going to go over a lot of the considerations you might want to take into mind when you're deciding how to title your notes. And all of this information is going to be very much in layman's terms, because I am very much a layman when it comes to file systems on the computer. And I honestly found it very difficult to find introductory information about this topic online, so hopefully this video can act as a bridge to fill that gap for you if you're also struggling to figure out why and how you should name your notes in a particular way. First, a quick overview. There are two things that you should remember when you are titling your notes, either in a physical or in a digital Zettelkasten. And they are, firstly, the file name should tell you at a glance what is inside of that note. And secondly, the file name should help you locate your file in the sea of notes that is your Zettelkasten. Ultimately, if you can do those two things reliably, recognize and locate your notes in your Zettelkasten, then the file naming convention that you end up using doesn't really matter. As with everything in personal knowledge management, the system has to work for you. Always make the decision that makes note making and taking easy and fun and sustainable for you. Don't just do something because somebody on the internet said that you should do it that way, or because some man 60 years ago did. So for starters, I'm going to flip this camera around and we're going to take a look at some physical note cards to see how I might want to title them. Okay, here is the pretend beginning of my physical Zettelkasten, and each of these notes has content, but it does not yet have a unique identifier, so I have no way to identify where they are in the system and let them reference each other. So we're going to try to name these new notes together. This note reads, "Arguments that video games will make players violent are reminiscent of Plato's arguments against theater in his Republic." So maybe I'm going to call this note Video Games and Theater. By default, the unique identifier for me is going to be 1A. My first note has been identified. The next note I had kind of stemmed off of that idea. It says video games are theatrical because the audience is a participant in the action. Well, that is kind of like video games and theater. This is like video games and theatricality. Because this note comes directly after this note in the logical progression of thought, I am going to call this 1A. B. Just a quick note from editing Morgan here. I believe that note should actually read 1A1, so just pretend that it says that for the rest of this clip. Now that I'm thinking about video games, though, I'm just having these other ideas about video games. So this note says, "Elden Ring's environmental storytelling encourages players to pay close attention and consider the world deeply, activities which are sorely lacking in society today." So this is not necessarily about theater. I guess I could make an argument that storytelling in video games is theater, because that's also storytelling, but that's not the total logical progression from here. So I do know this this is related because it is a video game, but it's not the actual link between this idea and this idea. Something else would need to exist here. So I'm actually just going to start a new section. So this is called Video Games with Environmental Storytelling. And this does belong in topic 1 because topic 1 is clearly something about video games. So instead, I'm going to call this 1B. And now it goes right there after all of the 1As. Okay, here's another topic. Theatrical has various meanings, even within theater studies. For example, it could mean the audience participates in the art, but it could also mean the material conditions of the art are visible. So now we have a note about theatricality, more generally. I know that theater is a big topic for me, so this is probably going to get its entirely own section. This is about video games, this is about theater. So my unique identifier is going to be 2. And that is going to come after all of the 1s in my note-taking system. You'll notice that I didn't make a card just called 1 or just called 2, and that's because until you start filling up the system, you don't necessarily know what each sequence in the system is about. But now we have enough notes here that I think that I know the 1 topic is video games, and the 2 topic is theater. So ultimately, that is what my file naming system is going to look like in my physical Zettelkasten. This system is flexible for whatever new ideas you put into your system. You could slot a new note card in absolutely anywhere within this system, basically forever. Again, I don't have a physical Zettelkasten, so take all of this with a grain of salt. If you do have a physical Zettelkasten and you do it in a different way, please let me know in the comments section below. I would love to hear. This activity honestly made me wish that I had a physical Zettelkasten, but I have a digital one. It's in Obsidian. So now we're going to go talk about note naming conventions for a digital Zettelkasten. In a digital system, you ultimately could use very similar unique identifiers for your notes as we did in the physical system. So in Obsidian, you would put a double square bracket and then your unique identifier and then your title of the note. However, that somewhat arbitrary sequence of letters and numbers are not as necessary to a digital system because we actually have a search function. We don't need like an index card that tells us which numbers and letters are associated with which topics, because we can just search that topic in the search bar and come up with our hits. Things don't have to be in a legible order for us to find them. That said, there are some other considerations that go into the searching for notes, so let's talk about those. First of all, let's cover the basics. What is a note name? Well, note names in Obsidian are actually file names on your computer. So of course you need to consider what you actually want your notes to be called in Obsidian, but you also have to consider what your operating system actually allows files to be named. If you open up the File Explorer and you go to the folder where you housed your Obsidian vault, then you will see a whole bunch of files there. And a file name consists of 2 main parts. Firstly, the file name itself, and then a dot, and then the file extension, which tells your computer which program to open that file in. So for instance, the suffix for Microsoft Word documents you might be familiar with is .docx, and when the computer sees that extension, it knows to open that file in Microsoft Word. Your notes in Obsidian, though, are markdown files, and their extension is .md. In your Obsidian vault, you're not going to see the .md, but if you open it up in a file explorer, you will see the .md. And because each of those notes is a markdown file on your computer, you need to follow your operating system's rules for naming files. This is pretty simple stuff. You're probably following the rules already. There's probably some special characters that you can't use in your file names, things like the greater than and less than signs, question marks, the upright bar, asterisks, colons, whatever. You'll figure it out. Basically, they'll be invalid. And a file name also has a maximum length of characters you can put in it. So, try not to make really long file names, like 255 characters or more is probably too many. Ultimately, the whole reason I'm making this video is because so many people have asked me why I put dashes in my note names. The very short answer to that is that it's pretty and it keeps my names consistent and it makes the notes stand out as notes as opposed to just text when I'm filling out my Zettelkasten. And the long answer is that programmers will sometimes avoid using spaces in file names because although they are accepted characters in file names, they can be annoying in programming. I don't program yet, Maybe I will in the future, in which case I want to avoid those pesky spaces. Apparently, in your command line when you're programming, a space has a special function. The space is used to separate parameters. So if you are trying to reference your file name in the command line and it has a space in it, you're going to need to specify that that space is just a space. It's just a space in the file name. It's not meant to separate parameters from each other. It has no special function, and having to specify that is just a little bit annoying. Also, if spaces appear in things like a URL for a website, then it also needs to be specified that it is a space. And so it might look like %20, which is just kind of ugly. So for future ease of use and future potential ugliness in my file names, I've also opted to use dashes instead of spaces. And this file naming convention of using dashes instead of spaces between words, it actually has a name. It's called kebab case. If you want to avoid using spaces in your file names, there are a variety of cases that you can use. Kebab case, of course, is all lowercase with dashes as spaces. There's also snake case, which is exactly the same thing, except instead of dashes, you use underscores. And then you've got camel case, in which you remove the spaces entirely and you capitalize the beginning letter of each word except the first one, or Pascal case, which is the same thing except you also capitalize the first letter of the first word. Other than just eliminating spaces in your file names, another benefit of choosing a case style and sticking to it is just consistency in the styling of your file names, which is going to make your Zettelkasten potentially easier to search through. And this doesn't just apply to the spaces themselves, but also everything you put in your file name is going to make it more or less searchable. So let's talk a bit about how I name my source notes. So every time I put a book or a source that I'm pulling information from into my Obsidian, I give it a special formatting of its name. And the way that I write it is last name of the author dash first name of the author dash the year that it was published dash the title of the book. Now, I am sure this is not the most optimal way to refer to my sources, and if you have a better way, please let me know in the comments section below. I am not beyond just going and changing every single source file name in my system, but let's talk about what options this consistent formatting opens up for me. First of all, because it's so uniform, it helps me quickly identify what is a source note in my Zettelkasten. It just looks different than the other note names that I have in there. Another thing is that it gives me all of the information I need to know what is inside of that note. I know when it was published, I know who wrote it, I know what the title of the work is if there's multiple authors in my sources, so already it's easily findable and it's easily knowable. But it also opens up some options if I start using regular expressions in my search bar. I am not yet familiar with regular expressions. It seems like kind of an advanced concept, but in brief, they are a more complex way of searching. For instance, if I wanted to find all of the texts in my Zettelkasten that were written in 2012, in my search bar I could write a regular expression that says search for any characters, followed by a dash, and then any characters, and then followed by a dash, and then the year 2012, followed by a dash, and then any characters. And now it's going to search through everything that meets those criteria, which should be only the texts that were published in 2012 by anybody with any title. And now I can easily find sources in a given year. I can't think of an actually practical example for that, but hopefully it shows you how choosing carefully the formatting of your file name and the information you include in your file name can open up more complex opportunities for searching your system. Now we're getting into what I consider to be the fun part of file naming, because our file names are now valid, our file names are now searchable, so the thing that I still need is to ensure that all of my permanent notes are understandable at a glance. Some people will title their notes simply after the time date stamp when they wrote them, so it's just this long string of numbers. And yes, that does always ensure that each note has a unique identifier so you can refer to it, but that string of numbers says absolutely nothing about what is inside of that note. So if I just have a long series of numbers on the left-hand side of my Obsidian, or in my graph view of my Obsidian, that's completely useless information to me. This string of numbers and letters we used on the note cards has a similar issue. So if you do choose to use that extra organizational system using those identifiers we discussed on the physical Zettelkasten, then consider adding a dash to the end and then writing the title of the note as well so that you at least know what's inside. Personally, I only put descriptive words in my permanent note file names. And I do this for three main reasons. Firstly, when choosing the note name, it forces me to consider the essence of the note itself. or what I call the thesis of the note. This helps me ensure that every note is a single thought. If I'm struggling to figure out what the thesis of this note is, what I should name the note, then that probably means there's too many ideas in this note, and I should create a couple notes out of this one note that are easier to name and to pinpoint what the essence of each one is. Secondly, because the note's name is the synopsis or the thesis of the note itself, when I see the note's name, I already know what the note is trying to do and what the note is trying to say. I don't need to open it up to be able to use it or reference it in other notes. And thirdly, when I'm writing new permanent notes, if I reference an idea that I already have a note for, I can actually just put the note's name in place of that text in this new note itself. And then the link to the related note, instead of being put underneath in some kind of like metadata way or over top, I can just like put that link seamlessly into a sentence that I'm writing, and that sentence will still make sense. I hope this video has answered some of your questions about why I put dashes in my file names, and maybe given you some ideas about how you might want to name your own notes, at least some considerations that you might go through when choosing a naming convention, either for your physical or your digital Zettelkasten. And if you do need a refresher course on the Zettelkasten for how to name your notes and everything else, then you might want to go to the app Shortform. It's a book summary app, and they have a really good summary of Sonke Aaron's book, How to Take Smart Notes, which is all about the Zettelkasten system for academics and nonfiction writers. I am an affiliate of Shortform, and I use their app myself to get refreshers on concepts like these, so if you use my affiliate link in the description box below, you will get 20% off an annual membership to Shortform, a free trial, and you'll really support my channel. So if that's something that interests you, then give that link a click. Please keep giving me advice about my Zettelkasten in the comment section below. It really does help me out in my process, even if it is sometimes slow for me to implement changes. And feel free to keep asking questions about your own Zettelkasten in the comment section below, because somebody else might be able to help. And maybe I'll even come up with another video idea from one of your questions. Thank you so much for watching, everybody, and I'll see you in another video soon. Bye!